Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Pod and the Pendulum, the horror movie podcast covering all the franchises, one movie in one episode at a time. As always, I'm your host, Mike Snoonian, and we are back this week for the second half of our coverage of 1998's Blade. Last week, we set the table with a lot of discussion on the character's background throughout the comic book history, a bit of like 90s history on like Marvel comics and Marvel movies, as well as just like a look at where this superhero film genre itself was. But we didn't really get to talk about the movie so much. So we are back this week to finish up our discussion. But first, joining me today, one of our co-hosts who is not trying to ice skate uphill at any given time, Mr. Devaughn Taylor. Devaughn, how are we?
Oh, I am fantastic. I am a rock hard, ready to talk Deacon Frost, Blade. I'm so excited. Peek behind the curtain of like splitting, like this being the first time we've or one of the few times we've like split it. It like made me like so excited like all week to then be like, oh yeah, like we got to do all this stuff, and now we just get to just nerd out over how badass Blade is. I'm stoked.
I think that'll be the way we do it going forward for movies that we think might be a little bit bigger, just because when we get to the movie discussion, like we'll be fresh. I think that might be the best way to go. So, and we should be ready and clear to go today. But back again, I was going to say joining us for the first time, but he was with us last week. He is from the podcast Genre Haze. Welcome back, Jay Kreiger. Jay, how are we?
Doing great. Looking forward to sinking my teeth into this one because, again, this was a film that I enjoyed the first time I saw it, but then hadn't had a chance to revisit it, and getting to chat about the history of this character with you guys last week was a blast, but I'm really looking forward to kind of digging into what makes this one of those standout superhero movies like we were talking about.
This is a fun one, and this is like one of the tent poles, like one of the things I think that really serves as a bridge between what superhero movies looked like in the late 80s, early 90s to kind of like what we see now. Like it's really is like rewatching it again for the show this week. It really does serve as like a nice little bridge from that campiness of the late 80s, early 90s to maybe like getting rid of a lot of that and taking the genre like a little bit more serious and giving like a more straight ahead action movie with some more clear motives and like not looking silly, I would say. So, but let's start a discussion. Devaughn, one of you, I had this question for you because this starts with like one of the great party scenes of all time in a movie. Like it kind of lets you know right away, like you go right to like a rave set in a meat locker, which kind of like a nice little visual, like bit of visual storytelling is that you're going to have like all of these human beings basically sent to a meat locker, like, oh, they're cattle that's going to be hung up for slaughter, basically. But I, myself, like I am not so much like a techno music person, and I'm not someone that's ever like done their own beats before. And Devaughn, I know like you've created your own music.
Well,
you haven't. I thought you had a whole other show where you did this when we first started talking years ago.
Well, I did. So I don't produce music. I have a song out that I did write and sing and come up with all the melodies and like arrangements for. I do not actually produce beats myself. Soon, because I'm gonna be getting a new computer here pretty soon, and I'll start dabbling. But I have not actually. I have many talented musician friends that make music for me. However, I am a playlist curator with good taste, if I do say so myself. At work, I tend to DJ the nights, and we have like different playlists and such. And but one playlist that me and another bartender collaborated on is like kind of like more dark dancey music. So we have the opening track from Blade in there, but then we also we'll play that song. We'll follow it up with the Mortal Kombat song, and then now my one to follow that up is the Challengers score, because that shit bumps so hard.
Is
it's
that Trent
ridiculous.
Reznor? Okay.
Yes, yeah, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, and it is a banger. But yeah, I mean, not even just one of the best like club scenes, like party scenes, but one of just like the best cold opens ever. You know, because it immediately, like you said, builds the world out. Like, oh, they're having these blood raves in meat factories and stuff, and like there's this whole underground and like this whole, and then you learn later like that club is like made by Deacon Frost, and like he like throws these events or whatever. But then it's like you get the Blade's reputation is just visually shown to you by how scared, like there's literally hundreds of vampires in this room and they are all cowering away from him, and that like says everything you need to know about like how much they fear him. And it's one of the better action set pieces of the entire film as well. I think this is like one of the best cold opens to a film. There was actually a quote unquote blood rave out here in LA. But I did not get to go to it because it was like an after hours party, and I had like a super long work week, and I was just like exhausted. I like physically couldn't get myself there. But I regretted it that I did not get to go to the actual blood rave. But one day.
That was a lot to take in. I'm going to admit there's a lot going on in that 2-minute burst right there. Not going to lie.
About as much as you're unfrosted from two
Which
episodes
you're not
ago.
wrong. You're absolutely not wrong about it. I will admit, like, I am the first one to admit that my unfrosted rant was unhinged, to say the least, which I think I've said multiple times on that episode. Yeah, I think the cold open is great. It was interesting seeing like Tracy Lords being the woman who is like leading Kenny Johnson, who I kind of recognize from The Shield more than anything else. Like didn't remember that it was him until like rewatching this for the show. It's like, oh yeah, there's Lem from The Shield, like with the douchiest of douchey 90 hats. Like that is the talking about his heat seeker. It's like that is about as mid to late 90s as it gets. But like seeing Tracy Lords in a getting like near top of the headline like billing in this as well for like what's really a 5-minute cameo. Like she went on to go work with like Ricky Bates Jr. and I think John Waters as well, like, but definitely for Ricky Bates.
Yes, because I actually in a 4-day span unintentionally I watched Excision, Blade, and Serial Mom, and I was like, oh, I'm just having a Tracy Lords weekend. Apparently,
she made that transition for what she's awesome in Excision, like as the mom in Excision. She's really good.
So good.
But what do we think of these vamps? Like the note I made is like these vamps are way more like near dark than they are Interview with a Vampire, which would have been kind of where, and it's funny, it seems like every 10 to 15 years when there's a resurgence of vampire movies, there's like two camps. There's like the aristocratic, very pretty, very handsome vamps, like what you saw with Bruce and Pitt, and what you saw like a decade later with Twilight, and then you saw it also with Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, and then there's like these vampires that are like, we're just going to rip your fucking throats out and shower in your blood, which is kind of where I am with my vampires. That's kind of what I want to see when I watch a vampire movie.
I was going to say, like, for me personally, if you were looking at sort of like the Universal monster tent poles, right? It's like vampires are probably my least favorite because of the whole like romanticism angle, the fact that, there's a lot of this the seduction aspect, which is like, I felt like for a long time we were just getting regurgitated versions of vampires over and over. And, you know, for me, it was even before I'd seen this film, getting to see like 30 Days of Night, which, you know, maybe people that are more fans of like traditional vampire films would say, oh, they're just like zombies or something like that. But I always found that, you know, that more feral aspect or portrayal of vampires, it has that more brutal tone to it. And in the right hands of somebody like the director, obviously Blade or David Slade, those are people that like understand the aspects of vampirism that are classical, but how they can take those aspects and make it their own. And I think Blade is a perfect example of that, right? We talked about that blood rave and like seeing how that is an aspect of feeding that they have incorporated into that urban setting, right? And the fact that we aren't so much focused on the like, oh, I'm going to cast a spell and make these people basically lure them there. It's like, oh, you're going to just pick out the scummy dudes on the street in LA who you want to talk about their heat seekers and just bring them back. It's not that difficult. You don't have to cast a spell.
Right.
You just appeal to their like basic sort of instincts. And then seeing how they run with that, and they have that class strife between the different types of vampires, but you still have familiars, but then you have the purebloods and the turned. And I love that dynamic to this movie. And the fact that that really allows Blade to operate by some of the conventional aspects of vampire films, but doing it in its own more modern urban setting.
Yeah, I think this movie gets to do like a little bit of like the best of both worlds, where you do get to see them like whenever it is time for like action and stuff, they go feral and it is more animalistic, but then they also do like kind of, you know, carry themselves with a coolness to them as well, which I find fascinating. And the way that, you know, Deacon Frost, you know, I love him as a villain, and even the way that he puts it, you know, like, you know, as he's like challenging the True Bloods and everything, but then like even when he, you know, because for me, like, what I find fascinating about vampires is like, I think being a vampire would suck. Like, I think there's a lot like all I think the negatives definitely outweigh the positives, honestly. But then in the way that he puts it, where he's like, okay, but like we are more powerful than them, and like we are more powerful than humans and all these things. Why do we need to be in the shadows, and why should we be underneath them? And like, I'm like, oh, well, when you put it that way, yeah, you kind of got a point there. Like, you know, like why should you if you are, you know? So it's like, that's like, again, like kind of just one of the cons of being a vampire, is that you like truly can't exist in the world, you know? So it's like, I find that very fascinating in the way that Deacon Frost like kind of challenges that. But yeah, I like these ones, definitely. I think Underworld also like kind of obviously took a lot of notes from Blade, but like also in their vampire portrayals as well, of it like kind of being like having the class and elegance, but, you know, still going feral when it's time to, you know, have an action scene.
I rewatched it this morning again, in prep, and the sort of like, not to get too far ahead, but it's like the back half of the movie has not always been my favorite, primarily the conclusion because of the whole like blood god ritual and all these things. But on this rewatch, it reinforced, I think, why Deacon Frost is such a good villain, because he is this guy that like is living this life of luxury, right, and whatnot. But at the same time, he has the sort of like vision of, you know, this is going to be what my life is for eternity, right? If he just keeps feeding and stuff. So like having this blood god ritual and sort of forcing the next stage of vampirism and whatnot, like that actually plays a lot better for me now than it did, you know, the last, whatever, 3 or 4 times I've watched this movie. And it made me appreciate just like his playboy persona, but at the same time, like he is the guy that has like the true vision for, you know, the vampires and whatnot.
Yeah, and this idea too that he's kind of like a funhouse mirror image of Blade, and that like neither of them are going to be truly accepted by their own kind. They're both have like one foot in both worlds, and they both kind of want to be just fully one thing. It's what they're both looking for. And one has been looking for the other, one has been dodging the other. And then you find out, of course, that they're related. So it kind of makes a lot more sense at the end of it all. Frost is a lot of fun, and Dorff, I think like Dorff looks at like what Wesley Snipes is doing in his role, and he's like, well, I can't do that, but if I do something 180 in the other direction, like this can be a lot of fun to play off of. And he's really great here. And we'll definitely talk about that in the sec, but I definitely I want to go back to something Devaughn said, like talking about the introduction of Blade here in this scene, and as perfect of an introduction to a character as you can have. Like these 5 minutes where he wanders onto screen and just takes out basically dozens of vampires. We mentioned a little bit in the first, well, a lot in the first episode, how like Snipes really was the perfect guy to play this role. But like, why do you guys both feel that like Snipes is so good, and why this serves as such a great calling card and a great introduction for him in this scene?
He is perfect. Like in this scene, like it's everything. Like it's his physicality, obviously. Like he is, a trained martial artist himself. So it's like that allows in these action scenes to have a lot more wide, shots, to have less cuts. Like this opening action sequence is like almost perfect. Like the way that is cut together, the way you can follow everything, for how frenetic it is. But yeah, so like Wesley Snipes' physicality, but then like you also see Blade's sense of humor, like because Blade's a funny guy, like he leads a shitty life, but like he tries to find humor in it where he can. He enjoys what he does. Yes, it's a burden that he's like taking on all these vampires, but he likes it. He has a good time. Like he's smiling. He's making faces at him, just like the times where he decides to like chuckle, or pump his fist after like staking somebody to the wall. So it's like he has like such great little nuances, like, with like, like his facial expressions are almost like as important as his like physical abilities in the things. So like he really just like embodies it. And it's just like, and like from that scene on, you're just like, I'm not watching Wesley Snipes. This is Blade. I watched this movie and I'm like, this is not Wesley Snipes. And like, then that's just how good he is and like how locked in he is for the entire film.
That intro does such a great job of sort of selling this new age of Marvel too, right? We talked about this is the film that they begin to leave sort of the 80s sensibilities and whatnot. Whereas if this movie had came out in that period or was more influenced by that period, we would have gotten some monologue about I'm the Daywalker, I'm here to, end you suckheads type of a thing. But instead, we just get we get actually the vampires that speak more to like the myth that precedes the man in, few words. And then he approaches them and just smiles, right? And I think that says it all. And then to see him follow through and just prove why he is this feared figure. And, as Devaughn said, like being a trained martial artist obviously allows them to work with a lot. Whereas sometimes, you get somebody that doesn't have the action chops and the cutting that they have to do around their, lack of expertise in that regard, that's going to show. And with Snipes, it's like, it is such a fluid movie. And I think that's because, of course, the fact that, he is actually up to the task with that. And I love that, like, you get to see his entire arsenal of equipment too, which is cool. You don't necessarily have like that traditional gear up scene, right? For something like Batman, which really worked for characters like that because there was more campiness to it. But here, you don't have to have this, again, like almost a monologue of this is this gun and this is that weapon and this is why
The
this is
Batwing,
he just
the Batmobile.
he just fucking shows you why, because he's staking guys to walls, and which is one of the coolest things I've ever seen, when he stakes the guy to the ceiling and then takes that stake and then stabs a guy and then kicks it into his chest. Like, it is such an awesome example of both martial arts, but this like fantastical weaponry that he uses, which I suppose isn't that fantastical, but it's just within that very strange world within that more urban setting.
Too, like what's great about Wesley Snipes is his versatility. Like he's someone that we probably first noticed when he played Willie Mays Hayes in Major League. So he's got comic chops. Like to your point, Devaughn, he comes into screen and rather than be just like grim dark and like, oh, he's a tortured guy that he's half vampire, half human, and like what a horrible fate this is. He's like finds the joy in what he's doing. He's like, there's that expression that like if you go to work every day and you love what you do, it'll never feel like it's work. Like he likes hunting vampires. So the fact that Snipes could do movies like Major League and then later on like White Men Can't Jump, like he could do comedies. He brought that to the table.
It's so funny because like this was my introduction to Wesley Snipes. So as a kid, like I always thought of Wesley Snipes as like, oh, he's like the serious badass guy. And then whenever I would go back and then watch those films, I was like, oh my God, he's a, like he bursts with charisma. Like, I mean, Simon Phoenix is, oh my goodness, like what a performance he's doing in that too. But like, so it's like, it is, tonally different than what he was kind of doing in the 90s. But again, he like still he sprinkles it in, and and there's just enough of it, like he has a few quips here and there, but like mostly it's just like the sincerity in which he says stuff makes me laugh throughout the film. Like he'll just John Wick takes a lot of inspiration, not only in the action department, but like in their personalities and in the way that they portray that too. Like John Wick, he doesn't tell you about himself, everyone else does. And I think that's something that came from Blade, but then also just in their personalities, that like he is just like so blunt and straightforward, with a lot of stuff that it's just like it makes you laugh. Like there's even a scene where he does a perfectly delivered yeah, and I was like, he just sounded like John, like So it's like I love seeing the influence that this portrayal of Blade has had on other action figures.
My introduction to him was New Jack City, and like that's obviously not a comedic heavy role. So to go from that to then Blade, and I was like, oh, okay, this is the guy that's going to lead this much more darker, more mature superhero era. And then when he uses the Blade bang, batarang or whatever, and then fist pumps, like that's one of those things where it's like, oh, okay, this is a guy that takes pleasure in his work, and then seeing how that plays out throughout the film, but not being overbearing. Because that's one of those things where it's like if you lead too much with the quips and the humor, it loses some of the seriousness with which this character, the sort of arc that they have and the relationships that they have, which we'll get into.
Yeah, and you mentioned like New Jack City. I mean, you look at like Jungle Fever, Passenger 57, Boiling Point, Rising Sun, Demolition Man. This run, Money Train, this run for him, and then he does something like Waiting to Exhale, which is more of a kind of romantic drama, a romantic comedy. Like he has one of the most versatile runs from the late 80s through the early 2000s, and he's a different kind of action star. Like you're seeing through the 90s, like action movies change as like the Stallones, the Schwarzeneggers of the world, they start to go, their stars start to dim a bit. Like after Terminator 2 and after like Total Recall and movies like that, like Schwarzenegger's like star starts to dim a little bit. Stallone is kind of really flailing about in the mid to late 90s, and you're seeing more Jean-Claude Van Damme's, like action stars like that. And this is, Van Damme stuff is, it kind of looks, when you go back and watch it, like it's fun, but it looks ridiculous. Like it is like, I can't believe I ever bought this guy as a badass. Whereas like when you watch Snipes here, there's such an economy of motion. Like nothing ever looks like it's wasted, that it's just, it looks fantastic.
Wesley Snipes' action, he's more akin to my favorite action guy, Jason Statham. I feel like they kind of have a very similarness to him because, like, neither one of them are huge, which, I mean, Wesley Snipes is pretty big in this. Like, he's pretty jacked, but he's not like, he's not Stallone or Schwarzenegger, like kind of big in this. And yes, he has a fluidness to him. Like, it's like Blade almost looks like he's like kind of dancing out there whenever he's like, spinning around and like, and like, I mean, the long trench coat and everything, like, there's something like very like kind of beautiful to in the way that he fights, and like and it's not just like, oh, here, I'm just gonna punch you as hard as I can. It's like, no, I'm gonna hit you with this 3-piece combo and then put the stake up through your chin, like stuff like that. Like, so he's more nimble and tactical in his fighting.
He's not the brute that some of those other action stars would end up being. And like you said, it's like he's yoked in this, but it's not to the the steroid degree that somebody like Schwarzenegger would be, where it's like, yeah, he looks like an action star, but does he really have a lot of memorable like fisticuffs moments? It's like probably not, unless he's throwing somebody over like a railing to their death or something. But yeah, I think that just even the way he moves outside of throwing guys around or doing these 3-piece combos, like I'm thinking about early on in the Blood Rave when he walks around the corner, just the way he like whips his trench coat around so he can reach for gear more accessibly and whatnot, and the sort of like fluid tactical reloading and stuff that he's doing, or how he chooses which gear to use in tandem with, kind of like hitting them a couple of times or whatever to expose a weakness of theirs. It seems a lot more indicative of a character that has clearly been doing this for a long time. This is not his first Blood Rave per se. And again, like just the choreography of that and the way that that plays out, I think proves that.
Going from that to like our next bit where we're introduced to Ambush Wright's Karen, who's going to be kind of like the third or fourth most important character in here. What do we make of her introduction? And you get kind of like this funny, it's almost played for humor, like she has the post breakup dissection, and again maybe an idea like why you don't date your coworkers because they're over a dead body, and he's doing this whiny like, do you ever think about us? And oh motherfucker, how does this work for you?
It's a funny introduction, but I'm glad that it's like out of the way here, because then the rest of the movie, like, there's no romantic subplot with Karen and Blade or anything. Nothing like that. Like even like when he like, sucks her neck at the end, like it's like kind of central, but it's also like out of necessity, and it's like still not, so it's like I like how it's like, okay, here we'll have like, this like little bit with her ex-boyfriend, doctor friend, and whatever. But I think Karen's a cool character because she gets to be a useful scientist. Like she, at the start, like Blade just uses her as bait and like does it. And she like, continuously throughout the film, like shows how useful she can be. And she ends up helping make the bombs. She does make it like at the end, like when in an action movie, like that would be the point, like they're on the rooftop, the sun's coming up, and they would embrace and kiss. No, Blade goes, you want to help make me a better serum? And she does, because we do see it in Blade 2 later. Unfortunately she doesn't come back, but one thing though, she's a hematologist. They had, I know they did like they like filmed a deleted scene cameo of Morbius was gonna like be the post-credit scene.
The director playing him,
and it, it was like in the distance. But like, why didn't they just make her Dr. Karen Morbius? Like, and like that would have been like a fun thing, or like because her name's like Jensen, or like what if she's like, oh, Jensen's my married name, my maiden name is Morbius. That would be like, oh, whoa, like that would be so fun.
It would have been like 20 years before the finger, or 10 years before the whole finger point too. Like it would have set the tone for that, like in every Marvel movie where like everything is a reference to something. So you're right, that could have been a thing. But within this scene, you get like Donnell Logan's Quinn coming back to life. And I just made a note about like this character being like so uniquely 90s that it felt like there was a point where every movie had every Tarantino knockoff had a character like this. And it's kind of funny because you think he's going to be built up to be some sort of like real foil for Blade. And he's so easily dispatched of every single time the two go head to head with one another, to the point like their last fight, it's like King Kong Bundy versus SD Jones in WrestleMania 1, which is like a 9-second squash match. It'd be like if I wrestled Brock Lesnar, is how every encounter basically goes down. But you would have this character that it's like, it felt like out of a Tarantino film. I just made a note, like it's hysterical to me that, Logan is one of those like real, like working man, journeyman actors that he goes from this to like a few years later, he's like a schlumpy suburban dad in Grounded for Life, which runs for like almost 100 episodes. Like what range, what a marvel.
He's very much like Deacon Frost's sort of like court jester, but instead of telling jokes, he's just like losing the same limbs over and over, which I think is, again, like a great example of the way this film uses humor, in that you have that sort of like the whipping boy henchman character, but at the same time, like it's a vampire instead of just like the normal sort of, merc thug, if you will. So it's like, it's cool to see them play in this universe in a way that can be comical, but at the same time, it shows off the action chops and
Yeah.
the VFX chops of this movie at that time. And, again, sets a new tone or precedent for like what you can show in a Marvel movie. It's R-rated. You're going to lean into that type of, violence, and having humor in there, that helps sell some of those moments.
Yeah.
Yeah, Donald Logue, he wasn't even supposed to be in the movie as much as he is. It was kind of one of the cases that like the director thought he was so funny that they were just like, yeah, we should just keep him in the movie more. So that allowed him, he got to riff a lot more. Like one of my favorite scenes is whenever they go to capture, they try to capture Blade, and they're fucking with his sword, and then the guy's like hand explodes and he goes, "You're a fuck up, Kreese," and it makes me laugh every time. I think it's a funny character, and I assume that's probably also them then leaning into it, like, okay, well, we gotta keep this guy in the movie, and then so it's just like, oh, like his whole thing is like, for some reason he regenerates more than other vampires, and like he doesn't just like get slain instantly until the end. He just like like that's his whole thing, is like he's not a good thug, but he's just always around.
He's just
though
very durable.
you can't get rid of him.
He's like, you to say that he should have been in it less, but like Norrington really liked having more. It's like Bela Lugosi in Ghost of Frankenstein, where they just kept writing more and more for him on set, like every day. And for more of that, go listen to that episode. So Deacon Frost, we get our introduction to him outside of just like that 2-second glimpse in the blood rave scene. And, to me, like, again, Stephen Dorff coming from The Fucking Gate, like one of the best gateway horror movies of the 80s. So much fun, where you get like a side character that is like heavy metal Harry Potter in that movie in like 1987. Dude is just like chewing up scenery every time he's on screen here, yet he's not, to use a pun, like too vampy. And you get this whole kind of like Harry Potter Aryan Nation subplot, like you're not a pure blood, you're a half-breed, which is really a generational divide with him and Udo Kier. I do make a note, like vampires like sitting around a boardroom table, like this is a trope we see a lot in some vampire. Like if you don't go the kick-ass vampire route, like they tend to be like, we're going to be the brokers of power, and we're going to like be in suits, and we're going to be discussing how are our stocks doing and whatnot. These are my least favorite kind of vampires. I find this shit like really boring.
Yeah, I love Deacon Frost. Stephen Dorff is putting on a hell of a performance. He looks fantastic. He is so hot in this movie. I love that he's like this like bratty Gen Xer vampire. He's also Blade's stepdad. We don't really talk about that much, but he is. I love that dynamic as well. And yeah, he's a perfect like yin yang, like, because it's like he has this big plan, but he's like so unserious about it at the same time. Like, oh, like here, like let me make my plan while I'm listening to blasting techno in my ears,
listening to the Prodigy, like or something like that.
Yeah, and it's so funny, and I love how he calls out like the boring vampire guys that are like, you guys are sitting at a boardroom table talking about your offshore accounts, and he's like, I just want to party. That's it. I just want to throw blood raves. I want to party at my house, and I want to be a blood god, and I just want to have fun. Like that's literally Deacon Frost at the end of the day, and his interactions with Blade are so fun too. And he's like not like big or like anything, like he's like definitely not physically imposing, so it's like I love how the lead up, it's like it can only be a match to Blade when he's like infused with this blood god. In the comics, Deacon Frost is actually a priest, and he's typically portrayed as an older guy with like white hair and a beard and everything. So this is a very different portrayal than the comic books, but in the comics, it's still the same thing. He did bite Blade's mom whenever he was born.
It's great to have a character that like clearly is subverting the more classical portrayal of those power brokers, right? You have this guy that I think when you're giving a more modernized telling of a classic monster, right, you have to have certain iterations that are represented by new generations. And the fact that they're able to like have this guy that is, more, I would say, outlandish compared to his contemporaries and whatnot, but have him still be tied to trying to exploit, the magical ancient roots of vampires and this blood god ritual and everything. It makes for a really fun blending of classic, but also this like new school of vampires that, while we've said overall, they're more vicious in their portrayal of the vampires for a majority of the time, he is not portrayed that way. But at the same time, that kind of speaks to like his vision, I suppose, or just the fact that, he has stature above those that are working for him and that he rarely sort of goes primal, if you will.
He doesn't have to. He has other people do it for them. I mean, that's kind of the main goal. I think you, to a similar degree, said it about like Blade's character introduction. Like Blade doesn't walk into a room and say like, I'm Blade, I'm a vampire hunter, I'm going to chop you up, sucker. Like everybody else is doing that for him. Like he walks into a room and heads turn and everybody whispers. Like they know, like the legend of him spreads around. And like, that's ultimately the best kind of power to have. Like when other people are doing your work for you and you can get other people to do your bidding, or you don't have to talk about, like I think of, I think I talk a lot how I work with middle school kids and like, they like to fight. Like we have like, there's middle school fight club, like where they go into the bathrooms during lunch and they beat the shit out of each other and we pretend it doesn't happen. And it's a thing, Devaughn. It's a thing. It's sixth grade fight club. And I'll sit down with kids. I'm like, look, like the toughest motherfuckers I know don't have to fight because it's beneath them, and that's the kind of power you want to have. Like when you don't have to do the fighting because everyone's scared of you anyway. And that's what Frost is going for.
I mean, I love villains that respect the hero, like because like he's a fan, like he's like, I'm a fan of you, he's like, you're a badass, I know I can't take you, like I get it, but like he has a respect for Blade, and is also slightly obsessed with him too. So it's like it's fascinating. Like he isn't like the villain that's like, oh no, you will never defeat me, and because I am the villain and you are you. Like he's like, no, like literally the only reason I can't kill you is because I need need you for this like ritual, and then like that's the only way that I can like stack up to be like as close to you. Like, and we see that like kind of continue on in the sequel as well, this like kind of thing of vampires, like they fear Blade, but then they also want to be like him. They all want to be Daywalkers, and like that's Deacon's whole thing. He's like, I literally just want to be a Daywalker. Like he puts on sunscreen and bike helmets to go out in the daytime, because he misses it, because also he was like, again, like he's a vampire that was human once, so like he knows what it's like to be out in the daylight and to enjoy a sunrise. I love that sunrise scene with Udo Kier is one of my favorite Deacon Frost scenes.
I wish there was a deleted scene where they have like different like super like low on the totem pole vampires having to put on like different levels of sunblock. Like you start with SPF 20. That doesn't work. They burn up. They're like, nope. SPF 30. Nope. They burn up. Then you get to SPF 60. They get a little crispy. So you eventually get to like the sunblock level you need where you can walk around for 30 minutes or so.
We finally found it. It only took 10 vampires, but we found it.
That would be the kind of like deleted scene I think I would love, and I think it would work in something like this. Like, give me that, give me what I want. Speaking of real life badasses, I think we get to the real like key relationship in this movie, like the glue that kind of holds it together. We talked about Wesley Snipes as Blade, but Chris Christopherson as Whistler, like the chemistry that he and Snipes share with one another. I mean, Devaughn, you mentioned how like it's kind of nice there's no romantic subplot between Blade and Karen. I think part of it is like there's no chemistry between them whatsoever. Like there's just
Sure.
It's like I have more chemistry with the people who like take my coffee at the drive-through in the morning, like which is none to begin with. But here, like, I mean, these two, like, off the charts, absolutely off the charts chemistry with these two.
Oh man, they are my favorite. Like that is the thing that I've like come to appreciate as I've gotten older is like this is a great father son relationship right here. Like the banter that they have between each other is so great. Like I mean, like even like I made a tweet this morning, like the serum scene, like and they lock hands, and it's like yeah, like like it's intimate and caring, but yet they also still have like that like banter between them and whatnot. Whistler was not introduced in the comics. He was introduced in the 90s Spider-Man film and then carried over into this. Blade had a different mentor in the comics. But I really love this relationship. Like, like there's, these like little ideas, they kind of sprinkle in like how long they've been, doing this together or Whistler they don't mention it, but like I think one thing that's interesting they talk about it like behind the scenes is that Whistler has the gimp because of Blade, like when Blade was like young and like out of control or whatever. I think that's like kind of interesting between them. But yeah, like Chris Christopherson, he's fantastic. Is like kind of this like hillbilly guy, but he's also like designs all these weapons and stuff and like and everything. I think their relationship together is fantastic.
Yeah, he comes off as being, obviously like the father figure in Blade's life, but at the same time, I love the way that Blade carries it. And Devaughn, you mentioned it earlier. It's like our relationship is he makes the weapons and I use them, but in the same way that the film does a great job of allowing physical actions to speak louder than just, again, this sort of like typical monologuing that you'd be used to with heroes. You get to see their bond and that it's of course much more than the way that Blade undersells it. And, you have that moment of him holding his hand during the serum, but at the same time, like at the very end of, Whistler's run, you have him, on the cusp of killing himself so he doesn't turn. And, you have that moment where it could have devolved into this kind of sappy monologue of Whistler calling him son or something like that, or I've always cared for you or this or that. But rather, he just tells him, now walk away, you stupid son of a bitch, which if you have these two badasses that have been, living this hellish existence essentially for however many years and they're bonded in this trauma, that is kind of the way that they're going to say, oh, you actually mean a great deal to me. It's kind of like how it's I suppose, the toxic masculinity way of telling another guy that you love them type of thing, which works for their characters. And at the same time, we've mentioned Karen and how there's not only no chemistry there, but to introduce her so quickly and then have her be this love interest kind of just goes against the ethos of not only Blade, but also just like Whistler, because Whistler, what is his trauma? It's that the vamps killed his family and they tried to get him to choose the order with which they would die. So the notion that Blade would ever try to have this romantic relationship when he sees essentially that that's impossible in this line of work, it kind of reinforces the importance of Whistler rather than just being, he's the guy that makes my guns. Like it's deeper than that, but at the same time, they're very economical, I think, with their relationship in a way that really works.
It feels like with the Karen and Whistler scenes, like you can see where Whistler can have these moments of empathy for someone like Karen. Like, I think if Blade were to break the news, like, okay, you're probably going to turn into a vampire, I'm just going to take you out right now. Or he would deliver that news with like just deadpan, where there's a little bit of sympathy going on with Whistler, kind of telling Karen, this is what's happening to you. This is what to expect. But then in the next breath, he can say, yeah, if the sun starts to hurt your eyes or you start feeling really thirsty all the time, get yourself a gun and use it on yourself. Like just kind of cutthroat, no nonsense, badassery that like doesn't, it's just a couple lines, but it's really cut to the core of who that character is.
Yeah, pretty much exactly what you just said. Like, yeah, like Blade is like, like trying to like, get her to tell her and her like, hey, you got to quickly like, catch up. Like this is the way everything is. While Whistler at least has like, hey, I get it. It's a lot to take in, but also here's, kind of the way it is. My favorite scene between Blade and Whistler is so random, but it's like whenever it's right after they like do the serum scene, and Whistler has the conversation with Karen, and they're gonna go question Pearl, and he's like, "Hey, I fixed this UV light. You want to take it out?" And he hands it to him, and he's like, "It's still heavy." And then Whistler just goes, "Well, you're so big." Just it cracks me up every single time. Like, and it's just like, such a small, tiny little moment, but like even in that exchange, their chemistry is just like so good together.
And also after that moment, he is like filling up his charger, and he's basically spilling gas fucking everywhere, and then lights a cigarette. Yeah, and just starts ripping a dart right next to it. And it's just like, if you didn't pick up that he is the, father figure badass that takes no shit, like he doesn't care. He'll take everybody with him if cost him style points.
That's another thing about this. Like, it's so like this movie being from another era, just like Whistler like ripping through like 2 packs a day during the course of the movie lets you know like this is a movie from a different time. It's just something you don't
Great
see.
cigarette acting. Great cigarette acting. Actually, they're coming back. I've noticed, like, in movies lately, like, there's a lot of cigarettes in movies again now, but, like, this is definitely one of my favorite cigarette smoking performances by Chris Christopherson.
I haven't noticed it, and I'm wondering, is it coming back, or is it, like, does it stand out when you see it now? Because it is so rare. Like, that is one of those things now that just like, and I'm not a smoker, so like I never have been, but like I know that just like lighting up a button now is like could get your movie in rated R. Like just the act of that, like the rest of your movies could be like the Care Bears meets Paddington and everybody loves one another, but like if Hug-a-Bear like lights up a Marlboro Red, like that movie is getting an R, which I guess probably it should if a Care Bear is kind of ripping butts. Maybe it's a different kind of movie.
He even gets, his own little action moment in a film that is primarily action, but he's, sidelined a little bit as just like the weapons guy. But he has that fantastic moment where he's like, what does he say? It's like, interrupting you fuckers, and then just mows through.
Catch you fuckers at a bad
time, and then mows through, 30 or 40 vamps while he's, one-handing a submachine gun on full auto. Like, it's great that they gave each of the characters their own little moment to shine with this more action-centric film, outside of their pre-prescribed roles as, what is essentially the chemist and then the weapons expert. But at the same time, they're allowed to thrive in that way in multiple avenues. I mean, when you talk about sort of utilizing genre well, it seems that Norrington had a knack for like when it would be appropriate in the film to allow each of them to have their moment, which I think allows this cast to, while again, we've said there isn't a lot of chemistry between Karen and Blade, at the same time, there is great chemistry between all 3 characters, in that they're allowed to kind of like showcase their importance outside of just, that's the smart one, this is the other smart one, but they kind of like get to show a little bit more of their chops.
Yeah, and even in that scene too, like he gets to show up, he bails them out, and then whenever they're like the like chase is happening, like he dips out, and like Karen's like, "Oh no, we gotta like go back for Whistler," and then Blade's like, "No, he can take care of himself," and like literally like he just like literally dips through a manhole and like skirts away from everybody, while Blade and Karen have to like kind of go on this whole like subway chase scene part. So yeah, Whistler is so versatile and so important to this film.
I made a note. I love the style of this movie. Like once you get into the second act and it kind of becomes like you've set up all the characters in the first. You know who Frost is, you know who Blade is, you know who Whistler is, you know who Karen, kind of get an idea who Karen is and who she's going to be. You get into the second act and you're starting to build out that world a little bit. So you get into that chase scene. I think Norrington has like a really good eye right here for what works and the energy of this movie. It's kind of like very neon, very fast moving, a lot of quick cuts. I like the little cutaway to like one vampire like biting into another woman as the 2 cars are going by. It lets you kind of get an idea for like how big the scopes are. And then it drops you into like a very non-vampire setting, which is this like very seedy, men's bar that's just filled all with like Japanese businessmen and these young women that are performing on stage that are like, it's, the stereotype of like Japanese schoolgirls like performing for overage, like not even their dads, like their grandfathers, basically. And it drops you right into the middle of this very seedy underworld. And, Blade looking very comfortable, kind of navigating it to get what he needs. I just love the world building and the style that goes into these next few scenes.
I think that
Oh yeah, like one the cinematography is like very underrated in this. Like this is a good looking film. Like I mean, like the colors look really crisp, and like you said, like it's like at night, like everything is like very everything's poppy and stuff, and like kind of has this is the start of the blue filter that Underworld would take and run away with. Because like there's like a kind of a coldness to certain scenes, with the slight blue filter over it. Like it's a really good looking film, and yeah, like I think the world building is done in such a way that, again, like we have Karen that's like the audience surrogate, like, but they do it in a way that's like, oh hey, these are things that have always been around, you just haven't noticed, and but then it's like, and then like once something points it out to you, and then it's like you can't ignore it, like it's kind of like that, like because at first it's like, oh yeah, like everything's whatever, but then once she takes that first ride with Blade, it's like, oh, there's just fucking vampires everywhere. She gets in an elevator, there's two vampires living in her building that she didn't know about, so it's like I think the way that they unravel it is really interesting. And especially in like having like the cops are under the vampire's thumb as well, so then like you see that, so again, like you said, like the scope of this is very interesting
in terms of like the filmography and whatnot, like one of my favorite scenes that I only really picked up on over these last two rewatches is that silent drive after Karen's been bitten and she's essentially seen through the Matrix, and she's taking that ride with Blade. And I love that scene because they don't say anything, but the sunlight in that scene is so overexposed to a degree that, some people might be like, well, that's just shitty composition. But no, it's the fact that, she's seen through the Matrix, and now daylight has a completely different context, and it's viewed as being threatening now. And like just little choices like that. It's not a long scene. It's less than probably 45 seconds, but it reinstills in the viewer like, oh, things are different now and there's no going back. You can't look at the daytime as you once did. And I think that, this movie, and I can only make this connection because Devaughn and I talked about Men in Black for Genre Haze a few weeks ago. And, the way that Men in Black uses New York City as this bustling sort of hiding of this other world is the same way that Blade does with LA. And, in Blade, it's of course a little bit more street level, a little bit more gritty, that underbelly, but it sells that in a very believable way, from the blood rave to then the reality of like, oh, you have these power brokers that have influenced politics and the police, and you're learning about like the blood runs and everything like that. That's just an aspect, I think, that sells this world and makes it very believable, because you can have those scenes when they're driving around and you see somebody feasting on the corner on somebody very casually, but at the same time, it's a bustling metropolis. Like people are not realizing these things because we're also, wrapped up in our own thing, or just there's, millions of people. And it's the same when, Blade busts Officer Kreiger down in the street, no relation, by the way. And, they have that shootout, or he basically pulls a gun on him. He doesn't have a shootout, but like everybody screams, then everybody just goes right back to, business as usual. And it's like, if you've ever spent time in a major city, like crazy shit happens all the time on city streets, and it's business as usual because that's what life is like in certain places sometimes.
Yeah, I noticed something whenever because I was watching on my phone and had headphones on while I was walking Cal this morning, and so I could like really notice in the sound design. But during the scene where Blade and Deacon Frost are having that conversation in open in the park, there's like. And so it's like they're having this conversation, but like in the sound design, like you hear just all these different conversations. You hear kids playing in the background. You hear people over here, and just like the movie reminds you that it's like, hey, like this is a real world, and they're like where there's people, like there's a lot of people, and like and that vampires are just like, again, like having amongst so it's like I like that this movie uses the setting, very well. Like this is a, like it isn't the romantic version of LA, like you kind of typically see. This is the gritty, sleazy LA. And I really like that choice.
It's people taking the bus. It's people like it's people taking public transportation. It is people like walking back to and forth. That's why maybe having it's good that like Blade can appear during the day and having some of that, because people are just walking to work. People are getting their coffee and they're like too busy to notice what is going on. You have that scene with the little girl where she's thrown in front of a bus and he rescues her, and then when he drops her off, like you notice like you never see someone where someone goes to comfort her at all. It's like people just kind of like saw this thing happen and then kind of like sidestep to avoid her because they have things that they need to do at that point.
Can we take a moment as a proud subscriber to Fuck Them Kids in movies? Her getting just thrown through a hot dog stand into traffic is so funny. It makes me laugh every single time.
I do want to pour one out for all those hot dogs though, because that's what I feel bad about. That's a waste of perfectly good hot dogs.
Yeah, her getting yeeted through that hot dog cart is like one part of the movie that is so memorable, yet I always forget that it happens, because it's just so, there are certain moments in this movie that feel very out of place, but at the same time, they are sold so well, whether it's that or, even in the very opening when in the hospital, when Quinn turns and then, the cops run in and they start just light up Blade as soon as they see him. And he's like, motherfucker, you out of your damn mind. Like that, the delivery of that line and that sort of like, just the cadence with which Blade says that line are very out of character for how he is a majority of the time. But because they are so selective with that, it ends up playing so incredibly well. Yeah, it works every time.
Well, and it speaks to, again, like Blade has says, like, what do I care? Like he has his eye on the bigger picture. Yeah. Like a different movie, he puts this girl through the hot dog stand and again, pour one out for the Franks. And he's like immediately going to try to prevent that. Like if this is a Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man is taking his eyes off the Green Goblin and he's going to try to prevent her from going through the stand. Blade just lets it happen. And he's like, oh, great. Now I have a clear shot. And he open fires on her. It's not until the girl ends up in front of a bus before he actually makes a move to go and rescue her, because his first priority is, if I take out Deacon Frost, there might be like one injured girl, but what is that amongst like what the actual real goal is here?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I think another scene that like kind of demonstrates Blade's just not giving a shitness is whenever again he like uses Karen initially as like bait to like get the familiar to like come after him, and it's the cop and he just trashes Karen's entire apartment as he's throwing this cop around. So like he just doesn't care. He loves beating cops up. Blade a cab, love that. And then he's also taking the jewelry and stuff from the cop, and Karen goes, oh, now you're gonna rob him too? And then Blade goes, how do you think we fund this operation? We ain't exactly the March of Dimes, as he's like still beating the shit out of this cop. I'm just like, this is hilarious. He also drives like an asshole too. Blade, that's another thing him and John Wick have in common. Like they are angry drivers that like don't give a shit. Like Blade like literally like drives through a crowd and they just like scatter.
Let's talk about what this has in common with another Keanu franchise. Because like Devaughn, you mentioned like the filters that are placed on it and kind of giving it that like kind of colder look. But, you see like some instances of like bullet time being used here, like a year before, like The Matrix is really going to take that to a whole other level and make it famous. Just like Blade's costuming, you have like the trench coat and the way he would like sweep that back. There's that moment that kind of kicks off the third act after Whistler's death when Blade walks in, and it's kind of reminiscent of the bank vault scene or the bank scene when Trinity and Neo like walk in, and it's like, holy shit, when they open up their bags and they have all their guns in them. The thing I noticed on this last rewatch too was like the beginning of the movie when Blade like tosses Karen from the hospital roof to the one below and then makes that jump. And again, it's very reminiscent of like what you're going to see a year later in Blade. I'm sorry, a year later in The Matrix. And it's not that I think, oh, The Matrix is ripping off Blade here, but it's interesting that this is where action movies are going to start to head. Like you're fusing martial arts and comic book imagery in a way now that really hadn't been done before, because now you have technology that can keep up with it. And although the effects aren't perfect, I think they still, like, watching this in 4K, it held up. Like Udo Kier's death on the beach still looks pretty impressive despite being like 1998 CGI. I thought it still looked really good.
Yeah, I mean it goes with the again, like the way that the movie's lit and film and shot. Like I think helps the blend the CGI elements in, and the difference between like the fashion and costuming in Blade and The Matrix, like Blade, he has a purpose to be like wearing all this like black leather. He's primarily at night. He's in the shadows. Like he's trying to be like kind of incognito doing stuff, you know, it makes sense. You know, I love in The Matrix, they just have those looks just because they want them, which is also awesome. They're just like, I just really want to wear this. That's also fun. But then also Blade in this, like, cause a lot of modern superhero stuff, especially in Marvel, like a lot of the costumes have like all these unnecessary straps and buckles on them. No, Blade has purpose. He has straps that have other weapons in them. He has like a thing on his leg that has like the things. He has a thing on his arm for the serum, the exploding ones and everything. So it's like even him having all this like straps and everything, it's all very purposeful. And he has a few different looks too. Like he's not just in like, oh, like black trench coat. Like he has this one look where he kind of has like a black, like a kind of varsity puffy jacket with the like he has like a bomber jacket with the bulletproof vest over it. Like that's a really cool look. And then like when he just has the red t-shirt and the bulletproof vest on, like you know, they have slight tweaks to his costume too, which I think is fun. There's variety to his looks.
The Matrix comparison too, like I referenced it a little while ago, but like the resistance fighters and the entities that battle in secret amongst the rest of society. And then when you have that person that transfers over, which would be Karen, right? She kind of like sees through that. But in terms of like the FX, that's always been one of the major criticisms that I've seen with this film online and whatnot, or just even talking to people. And with the exception of maybe like the very final confrontation, I think that it's still, even, you know, I just watched a regular HD copy, whatever, on Prime, and I thought the like disintegration effects still looked pretty good. And at the same time, like it is a comic book movie. So I'm looking for something that, you know, might, at the time, maybe it was perceived as being cutting edge, but it still feels like, I suppose, appropriate for this type of movie in that world and whatnot. And it sells, again, like how devastating Blade is as a fighter, because he knows exactly what to do to his opponents, that they literally just disintegrate into ash.
I think,
but like,
the only thing to me that maybe hasn't aged well would be like the blood effects. Like that's really about it. But I don't think that, I think to this day, like CGI blood effects don't look good. I think that's something that is still a struggle to figure out. And I made this comparison last week. Like this is a year after Buffy the Vampire Slayer hits the WB. And the reason I mentioned that is like the way vampires die in that show is the same. Like when a vampire dies, it gets staked, it disintegrates. And that was done for very practical reasons. Like we need to get these actors off screen. Like we can't have them just lying around. So as a matter of practicality, we just need them to disappear. And you know, the effect got better over time, but it never looked great. It's a TV budget, and it's not even a network show, and it's like a like WB budgeted TV show. This was like a little bit better, or not even a little, like it was a step above that, with the same idea, but you could add in like some pizzazz to it overall. Overall, I thought like the effects looked good. And then you would go to some really nice, like you go to that like temple at the end of the movie, and it's like a practical set. It's something that's really tangible. It has a sense of size and scope and feel to it. And there's an echo to it. Like the voices sound different because they're not just shooting on a green screen at that point. And it, to me, for like a movie that costs maybe like 1/6 of what they're going to spend on like the next Ant-Man movie, it to me looks worlds better than a lot of the current Marvel stuff. And I would much rather, from a effect standpoint, watch this than like the green screen stuff we get now.
Yeah, the shooting on sets does make a big difference. Like there's a weight to it, and it also it helps the action scenes, because I think they do a cool thing with not only the set, but it's like a cool camera thing that they like sometimes do this like these like little tiny camera pushes whenever Blade like lands a solid punch, and like to like to like emphasize the impact of his movements and everything. And then but then it's like it's not only that, it's like when he punches, but then when you see people like hit the ground or hit the wall super hard, and again it's like you can't really get that when you're doing these green screen scenes, but like doing it here and like combining the camera work with these wire movements, like him sending people flying and stuff like that, like like you feel the impact so much more on like all the action scenes of Blade because of this. And I think that's super fantastic. I love it.
When it comes to the effects in this film, I think that for a movie that is primarily an action horror movie, obviously we're in this world of vampires, so like rooted in horror, but like the horror truly shines when it comes to the kills. And I think that especially when you have that Udo Kier death, right? The fact that he doesn't just burst into flames, right? Which is like what you would expect. You literally see his body ripping apart in this brutal detail to a degree that it is like shocking every time it happens, because again, like in very specific moments, I feel like this movie appropriately leans into R rating, right?
Yeah.
Which is what you want when you kind of are trying to, show that you're going to go the distance with that. And I think that even with, like those silver injections that Karen makes that he starts stabbing the vamps with, and, they kind of are like the R rated version of In Big Trouble in Little China, when that guy kind of like bubbles up and then explodes. But this time you see just this grotesque bubbling of skin and then this blood geyser that basically erupts from them. Like it's really leans into that in a way that feels fitting, but at the same time, I feel like if it was like that with every single kill, it would almost kind of like overshadow the action aspect of this. It would almost distract, I think, from just like the technical proficiency of the choreography of all the martial arts and whatnot.
And we can't have Blade covered in his good leather covered in blood. We can't have
He doesn't
that,
even have Whistler around anymore to help get that out.
Oh, we need to see Whistler and Blade doing laundry. That'd be so wholesome. But the movie picks and chooses really good times to when they do their digital effects versus the practical. Because like Jay said, like we have that like head explosion, which it's like digital, but then they and yeah, it doesn't look the best. But then you forget about that when you get the two geysers of like actual blood that happens. So it's like okay, so like we got the digital here, but then we got the actual one here. What holds up, I think the best best effect of this movie is Pearl. Pearl is so grotesque and like such a feat of effects work that takes up this entire room. And when you're watching the movie and like Pearl farts, like I feel like I can smell it because Pearl is there, is tangible, and just like looks like so like again like really leaning into the horror, Pearl is like kind of a slightly different vampire, because of whatever, and then. And they're saying like, oh, Pearl's also this big because Pearl eats kids. It's like Jesus, like oh my god,
approve. We approve.
So, but a great effect.
That shows the spectrum of again like the types of vampires there are. Like there are the ones that are concerned with power, and then there's the ones that are just like Deacon Frost. They're there for a good time and a long time, and then you have people that have like fully embraced the feral lifestyle of vamps, and that being Pearl. But also like that is one of my favorite examples of the practical work in this movie because of how grotesque the UV sunburn is and the varying degrees of that, to the degree that it makes my skin crawl when I watch that scene, because it's constantly horrific. And as Devaughn said, from the fart to that and the amount of smoke that fills the room, it's like, oh fuck, I can smell this character not only before they had this horrific sunburn, but now, quite literally their flesh cooking.
Well, I think one thing you've mentioned in the three deaths there, the first death with like the silver nitrate kind of causing the expansion and then explosion, with Udo Kier's death, and then with Pearl's death. What each character does is they sell the agony of that physical transformation. Like, why do we remember the transformation in American Werewolf in London so much? It's not just like Rick Baker's incredible effects work. It's also like David Nelton selling exactly how painful it might feel to have your bones like stretch and break and reform in such a quick time, and to have all this hair sprout out from you, and to grow like a snout and to grow claws in this time period. Like, part of it is like the agony he's able to express. And I think in each of these deaths, not only do you get like a pretty cool effect, but you get a performance underneath it. You get someone who's selling like, this is how one might react if this were to happen. And I think that goes hand in hand, like the performance goes hand in hand with the visual effect as well, in order to give you that suspension of disbelief, where sometimes you just get a visual effect, it looks cool, but it's ultimately forgettable because you forget the performance aspect of it.
Yeah, having the who does the voice of Pearl, because the vocal performance is really funny in it as well. So yeah, like again, like getting that, you have that tangibility aspect to it. Another really great comedic beat here in this scene too, because like after Karen they're doing the interrogation, like burning Pearl, and then like Karen like goes crazy and like really burns Pearl to a crisp, and like Wesley Snipes like gives her a look like, damn, like that was too much. Like, and if Blade is telling you it's too much, and then Karen just goes, oh, she moved, is really funny. But like again, like Wesley Snipes just selling those moments with facial expressions is so fun.
The actor that did Pearl's voice is Eric Edwards, who I'm not familiar with at all, but that's who it was.
Oh, fantastic though.
Let's talk this third act a little bit. So Jay, you mentioned this is where the movie falls off for you a little bit, or it did a little bit. I made a note. I'm like, it becomes a bit of like the Passion of the Daywalker, because there's just seems to be this extended period where Blade just gets an ass whooping, and it just seems to go on a little bit too long. Like they lay it on a little bit thick. To me, I could never quite wrap my head around the like, oh, it's his mom is part of the reason he gets ensnared in this. Because as far as I know, like, you're not going to recognize your mother, because he would never have seen her before. Like that whole flashback to her on the floor, it's like, Blade, you're still in her belly, dude. Like that makes no sense. Like that makes zero sense.
That's such a
which
I never thought about that.
Which I guess is okay. And then it's like Deacon doing the "Who's your daddy? I'm your daddy." Guess a little incest is okay here and there, but it definitely, you could have trimmed some of this and we would have been fine.
Yeah, I mean the movie is a solid 2 hours, and maybe could be I think that's paced pretty well, honestly. Like, because I think it's it's kind of different, because it's not like as the same as like, oh yeah, the villain is gonna has this whole plan, it's all to kill the hero, and it's like, oh no, like we need the hero for this whole ritual type deal. I've always loved the I think the actual ceremony itself is really fun. Like I like seeing the blood like go up the ceiling and like fill up the like little things and whatnot. And it's like they're cutting back and forth between the ritual and then Blade having this weird moment with his mom talking way too close to his face for my comfort. even if it is Sanaa Lathan looking fantastic. And she also has a really great scream when she dies. It gives Sindel from Mortal Kombat or something.
Yeah.
It's really fun during that whole scene. So I mean, the finale for me, I like it. It's a whole bunch of whatever, but then we get it's a good 10 minutes. It feels like of Blade, just like beating the shit out of everybody in that temple. It's
Even
awesome.
before we get to that, here's the question I have: like the other vampires, right? Your other heads of the table. They don't seem to be under any duress. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't seem like there's never a moment where there anyone until the very end where they're really, really struggling. They all just are kind of like, okay, you need us to line up in this circle under this fount. And there are all these symbols there. Wait a minute. But they all kind of go along with it. I guess we'll humor him.
Well, they got him at gunpoint. Deacon's gang is they're pointing the guns at him, but also it kind of shows they're all talk. They sit amongst this table and they have the power, quote unquote, but it's they don't got shit, they're scared shitless.
That is the thing. You could nitpick, which I've definitely done with the ending a bit, and just been well, how are they in charge of anything? I thought they had all this influence with the cops and politicians and whatnot, and ostensibly that goes along with the military. But when it comes push to shove, to Devon's point, they were a bunch of bluster. They basically were living with this false sense of security for all of these decades or whatever, based on we are the purebloods type of a thing. But then when you get to that finale, it's just so he just rolled up on you guys and that's the end of it. You guys just have to go along with that, which is fine. And I think that my issue with how it ends is that, again, Deacon Frost is this guy that is going to have this he's the new progressive vampire wave kind of thing. And while they are dabbling in, that ancient sort of rituals and roots of vampirism, it gets a little too in the weeds at times. I'm do we really need to know all the ins and outs of this? It's a ritual. We're going to, end the world basically for humans. I guess though, on reflection, I would rather the pacing issues be confined just to that final act rather than throughout the entire film, which to Devon's point, it's about a 2-hour movie, but it doesn't feel like it outstays its welcome to the degree that perhaps some of these other 90s films would.
It moves quick for the first 90. That first 90 moved
absolutely
quick. I think just it gets bogged a little bit down in that last act.
I'd agree that you could cut Blade's mom out of the entire movie. She's a lamp, basically. They call it that's what they call a lamp character. If you take her out of the movie, it wouldn't affect anything, and she really does not need to be there. And so if you take her out, that's that extra 10 minutes that we can get out of there, and tighten it back up a little bit.
The fight sequences at the end look great. I think they're marred a little bit, but it seems like Snipes, and we're going to talk about this a lot more when we get to Trinity, and what Snipes may have had in his contract about what he would and wouldn't do. But it feels like Snipes here is all right, it's the third act. So I'm not even, no one can lay a hand on me at this point, because he just cuts through everybody like me going through a Brazilian buffet. It's just put the meat on my plate and I am gobbling that down. No one lays a finger on him through the whole last, even Deacon Frost. Frost never really lands any sort of good blow on Blade. He just, he's ultimately not very formidable, even in Blood God phase. He's not that much of a threat. And I think you both mentioned, he's a great villain. This is a trend that one thing I don't love about superhero movies. You have these great villains like the Joker, like Green Goblin, that are able to survive for many, many comic runs and many itinerations. And you put them in a movie and they're one and done. Doc Ock is dead at the end of Spider-Man 2. Green Goblin's dead at the end of Spider-Man 1. Joker's dead at the end of 89. Tim Burton's Batman, and Deacon Frost is gone at the end of this. Why, when you have this really charismatic villain and a great performance, figure something else out? You can win the day, but you might want to bring this guy back later on.
I mean, I I guess looking
Or
back,
not. I
it
don't
doesn't
know.
bother me
Maybe
as
not.
much. Well, I guess it doesn't bother me as much because because that's also part of the reason I like Tune, that we get to like switch the
Sure.
subgenre up with a different kind of set of villains. But like, yeah, it would have been nice to see Deacon Frost come back in Trinity or something. That
I
could have
don't
been
even
fun.
mean like the next
But
movie, but eventually down the road.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, yeah, sometimes I think it is silly when it's like, when it almost looks too easy for the hero, but then at the same time, like, hey, they caught him slipping, they beat his ass that one time before Whistler bailed him out, and then they caught him slipping to get him for the ritual. So I mean, so after that, I'm like, fine, like he's pissed off at that point, and he's like, he's making a point at Blade is making a statement that like, hey, the only reason you caught me is because you guys pulled some dirty shit, and now I'm gonna show you that you guys literally cannot fuck with me, and like that is him just like mowing everybody down. So like, I'm
Okay.
with it.
Marvel has historically, I guess I shouldn't just say Marvel, but like superhero films in general, I think have had an issue with giving villains a proper send off. And I think that's indicative of this film with Frost, and also, a character like Quinn, who we talked a lot about as being a standout. And, while we get that badass, Blade catching his glasses, putting him on, having the needle drop, at the same time, like this is a character that was more pronounced than 80% of the other bad guys in this movie. And he just goes out just like that. Which, it's not to say that, again, as the court jester of Deacon Frost's crew, that's kind of fitting, right? The fact that, up until this point, he's always come back, and then now it's just a one and done swing and he's dead. But at the same time, like something slightly more memorable. You can still have that needle drop and have an interaction, a final battle that's not 5 seconds long. And with Deacon Frost himself, again, like it's the type of thing that it almost feels like I would rather spend more time in that battle than, again, the fisticuffs that occurred before that, where he's just ripping through guys in a manner that doesn't live up to some of the other fight scenes that we've seen previously. Not that they're especially egregious or anything like that, but they lack a lot of the identity of Blade, I think, because it's a lot more of just the traditional, I'm going to break this guy's neck, I'm going to throw this guy off a ledge type of thing. And it's not as, I suppose, fluid with the sense of like incorporating all his unique gear and weapons. It's just, in the Blood Rave is what makes that segment so awesome. And here it's kind of just, I don't want to say phoned in, but it's a little deflating, I suppose.
It's a little bit like I've got to get my win back, right?
Yes.
It's a little bit like I got taken out by all the lackeys about a half hour ago when they were hitting me with the taser. So now I got to beat the hell out of them to remind everyone I'm a badass. It would be like,
Yeah, exactly.
if in a Star Wars movie you spent more time with like Luke Skywalker just chopping down stormtroopers, and then the lightsaber battle with Darth Vader was like 30 seconds long. Like that's
exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
I guess, like you guys mentioned too, it might be just at the behest that the secondary villain is a comedic foil, not a like actual like because in a lot of action movies, it's like there's like a secondary antagonist that like can like kind of go toe to toe with we don't really have that here because the lady vampire, I forget what her name is. Mercury, she doesn't really get to do much either. She has like that one scene with Karen, but like so it's like we don't have like that secondary villain to like really challenge him. And but I do give the sword fight and that might also tie in with like the ending for Frost, because the sword fight was a reshoot. They did a test screening, and it was like the blood like tornado or whatever, and then they were like, no, we need to have an action scene between them. So that was a reshoot, and I guess a sword fight was the best they could do with it, but it is like very short though, unfortunately. There could have been, they could have drawn it out a little bit more, like really show like Deacon's the quote unquote blood god, so like really show that off a little bit more maybe, but
just being able to bring him back. I mean, look, all I'm saying is like eventually there's going to be another Blade movie. Like they keep pushing it back, but eventually it's coming out. And what if you had, hear me out, like Deacon Frost in 2025, and he's become what he hates. He's become Udo Kier. He's become the guy who's at the table, and he's like, fuck them young vampires, fuck them young bucks. And he's the guy that it's like, how are my stocks doing? and he's like mixing some Metamucil in with his, blood drinks because, he's a little older and, he's got to get moving and, like could be interesting is what I'm
Hey,
saying.
I mean, I guess. I mean, it's a new continuity. Anything's possible, But I would be upset if Stephen Dorff got to come back and Wesley Snipes doesn't get to come back in the
Yeah.
new Blade. That feels unfair, unfortunately. But Stephen Dorff, I mean, hey, he's still
Yeah.
looking good. So I mean, he could still pull off the open two buttons black dress shirt.
I think the most realistic way that you could bring back Wesley Snipes at this point, so long as Mahershala Ali is still going to take over the helm, is have Wesley Snipes have a cameo where he plays basically the role that was the like herbalist or the person that makes that serum for Blade in this movie. Have him come back in that kind of role where it's like you get to have the original guy show up. He's in a meaningful way, almost like imparting a little bit of that Whistler sort of, I suppose, maybe not necessarily father figure, but just like the guy that is able to help Blade carry out his mission in a way. Because otherwise, like, I don't know.
He could play the his mentor from the comic. His name was Jafar Alson, I believe. And he was a jazz musician. Because originally in the comics, Blade's alter ego was he went under the guise of being a trumpet player, I believe. And so in the comics, this Jafar guy is who is more the mentor and trainer of him, and is a Southern black man. So Wesley Snipes could play him.
What else do we want to cover before we wrap up things here today?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of my other favorite fight scenes is the one versus the like teenage black vampire who's going kind of toe to toe with Blade for a minute. Like that's a really fun scene, and it's also funny because I feel like John Wick 3 had to have been shouting out Blade because there's a scene where when they're in the room with all the record hall and Blade's just like throwing everybody through all these sheets of glass. They do that in John Wick 3 whenever John Wick is like fighting the two dudes and like they are just like throwing each other through planes of glass. It has to be Blade inspired, but that's another one of my like really fun action beats from the film.
I love the inclusion too of that young black girl character because of the fact that I was watching this movie with some people and they're like, oh, this is random, but then again that speaks to Blade dabbling in two eras of vampire media. The fact that you have this more modern, this newer take, but at the same time that is very classical in vampirism, is that they will use either kids to help lure in people, or even in something like Dr. Sleep, that's one of the big predicaments, is that when people get this everlasting life, like one of the characters is a kid, and that sucks for that kid because they're going to be a kid forever at that age, but the rest of the group is able to utilize that to exploit other people and whatnot. And like that, again, we see that in Blade where he has a moment of hesitation, and we even see that kid, I believe, early on in the party scene at Deacon Frost's house, and you're like, why the fuck is there a child here? And then later on you realize, oh no, this is actually like a part of this crew that has a function.
She's probably an adult,
right? She's probably 1,000 years old, but the fact that she's a child, people overlook the potential deadliness of that character.
Yeah, it is, and it's like, and during that scene too, it's like after that scene, the scene in the hallway with Blade versus like the two people that he makes their heads explode. There's a moment that always again like makes me giggle of like Wesley Snipes is just like little things as he like kind of does this like boxing like kind of jumping like motion like, and he like has like a smile because again he likes it, so he's like fighting these two and he's like, ooh, this is about to actually be a good fight, and he like is like kind of doing his like little warm-up bounce again, is just like, and he like throws his hands out to the side like doing like kind of like a Apollo Creed type deal. It's just like, again, like these like little subtle things that are what make Wesley Snipes' performance as Blade so magical.
And maybe it's because we don't see him in as many A-list projects now. Like Denzel has been A-list his whole career. I think we forget just how charismatic and how good Wesley Snipes really is and can be, because like he doesn't, kind of like Nick Cage, and I think like Nick Cage is a little bit of a different animal. Like Nick Cage does a lot of weird projects, and Nick Cage does a lot of projects that are genre based. So we have a special place in our heart for him. I say we, like I'm probably the most critical of Nick Cage, more so than other people. But like Snipes now does a lot of like direct to video things because he's got to pay back the IRS. So it's like, I'll do it. But man, like he had a run, and this guy just had charisma for days, and there just seemed like there was very little he can't do on screen. Like he's just a movie star in a way that a lot of people now aren't.
Yeah, definitely the height of his powers. I guess my last thing I would ask is because we know that the sequel goes in a different route. The final scene, would you guys have wanted to see Blade in Russia? I believe they did a comic like follow up of it, but that would have been fun. That they should have done like a little short film of like Blade like in Russia. I always thought that was gonna be fun, like Blade in the snow. Yeah.
I think that that's like in this era now where we have every single Marvel movie ends in like, here's the setup for the next thing, or those kind of like very underpolished sort of cliffhangers, I suppose, for the next film that's coming or the next team up movie. I really love the ending to this movie because I think that it does a good job of setting up the potential while never selling you something that might not actually exist, right?
Yeah.
It sells the relationship between him and Karen, the fact that, make me a better serum, the war isn't over. And then having Blade in Moscow shows that this is much larger than Los Angeles. It's much larger than the United States. But at the same time, it doesn't give you this breadcrumb for a continuation of that narrative that might at the time not happen.
Yeah.
It's just like another adventure for him, It's just like, it's just Blade's next adventure, and then we pick up in 2 in a, completely different thing. Like he's like, I did that Russia trip already.
How much are Officer Krieger's rings and jewelry worth? Where like Blade's flying to Russia,
fucking nothing because they were fakes.
Like he must have.
No, after the thing that we didn't see in the finale is Blade and Karen running everybody's pockets after the ritual.
There are no pockets, though. They're all gone. Or are the clothes still there?
I don't know. Maybe.
These are things,
or at least the jewelry would still be there. Maybe the clothes aren't there, but the clothes disintegrate, and then just all their money was out on the ground.
I like that Karen has a job she didn't apply for. And that he just is like, all right, maybe another serum. Like, you're the new Whistler 2. She's like, I have a job. He's like, you're a Whistler 2 now. Like, you're doing my bidding. So good for him. Just like, he's like, you're hired. He's like, it's great. Love that. And then she's not even back for the next one.
She didn't like the Russia trip, so we don't talk about the Russia trip. That's why Karen didn't come back. She was like, it's too much. I can't travel with this guy.
So I haven't watched the second one since seeing it in theaters, and I remember really liking it. Do they explain Karen being gone? I don't remember for the life of me.
I think there's like a mention of her because he has a different serum. I think there's a mention, like one line about her, maybe. I think
it's not a Jaws 4 situation where there's like a picture of Chief Brody and there's not a picture of Karen up on the wall, which would be amazing. So
the benefits of being the Daywalker's plug weren't quite what she was expecting.
Yeah, she got like she was killed very quickly. All right. Any final thoughts?
No, I think we hit it. Blade fucking rules, y'all. Like, I mean, I've watched this movie like 5 times this year already. Like, I mean, I can watch this movie endlessly. It's in like, I guess what I will say is, I'll reiterate it next week. But a lot of people like to do Blade 2 is actually a lot better than Blade 1, and no, it's not. Blade is the superior one. It is top notch. Hope y'all don't forget it. You got 3 hours worth now proving it.
Are you gonna do like your rankings where like Trinity is ahead of Blade 2?
No,
okay,
not that crazy.
Okay, well, crazy, you never know, man. You never know.
I'm a Blade Trinity is not that bad. That's my take on it. Sure. Like, it's not that bad, y'all.
Okay.
The last thing I'll say about Blade is that this is a movie that I haven't seen it 5. I've seen it 3 times this year already. 2 of the other times I was showing it to my buddies that they watch movies with me, mostly because I force them to, and it's not something they might seek out, but at the same time, I think that going back and looking at some of the earlier Marvel stuff from primarily like this era and the early aughts, for people like myself and some of my buddies that are maybe burnt out on superhero media, which is not a new phenomenon, this is the type of movie that I think reaffirms that you can make really stellar superhero movies that are devoid of some of the more modern conventions. And that just the idea that, you could make a movie like this nowadays. It's just that because of superhero films having this exponential scope and growth to the degree nobody could see coming, we've kind of gotten away from what made these characters, and as niche as characters like Blade, so unique and such a standout. And if anything, I went right from this. I'm rewatching the Ang Lee Hulk movie for the first time since I saw it in theaters. I had watched the first hour before I had to go out or whatever. And like my roommate and I had the best time watching that because it's leaning into what we used to think superhero movies were going to be and feel like it came right out of like a comic book panel, which admittedly is very different than Blade's direction. But at the same time, it's capitalizing on what we love about comics and those characters in two different ways, but in ways that are just, visually, tonally, more interesting, I think. So
it truly is the spectrum of superhero movies.
Pretty much.
Ang Lee's Hulk to Blade. That is the spectrum. And it's a great movie.
Yeah, Ang Lee's Hulk is brilliant. I really love that movie. It gets unfairly
got some horror elements in it.
It absolutely does.
And it's got a lot of pathos to it. Yeah. A lot of pathos, and Eric Bana is great. I loved Ed Norton as Bruce Banner. I thought he was great in The Incredible Hulk, but Ed Norton's going to be Ed Norton and get himself fired off what would have been like one of the most lucrative gigs in history just by being himself. So, sometimes, and I'll say as a therapist, they tell you to be your authentic self. Sometimes it doesn't pay to do that, folks. Sometimes be a phony is all I'm saying. All right. Jay, it's been a pleasure having you on, my friend. If we wanted to hear more of you and we wanted to hear about your Genre Haze, and I apologize, I don't have the other one at the top of my head, but where can we find you and listen to your shows right now?
Well, first, I appreciate the opportunity to come chat with you guys. It always means a great deal to me when Devaughn recommends me on somebody else's podcast. And when I've already been a fan of the podcast he's recommended me for, that always means a great deal to me. So thank you for that opportunity, both of you. If people want to follow my podcasts, top of the show, Genre Haze. That's a weekly podcast that releases on Fridays with my buddy Stuart Garris and I. That's at Safe Room Pod on Twitter for show updates, all major platforms. I also do Safe Room with my transatlantic brother, Neil Bolt, for Bloody Disgusting on the Bloody FM network, which is a horror video game podcast. That's going to be on every Monday. You can follow us on Twitter at Safe Room Pod, also all major platforms. And if people want to follow my brand of nonsense on Twitter, my personal, just keep up with projects, freelance shit I'm doing. That's at NotFunnyJ on Twitter. So, yeah.
Excellent. What would be a good under the radar horror game to play right now? Like not one that comes to mind right away. Like everyone knows like the Resident Evils and Silent Hill.
Yeah.
What would be like a decent, not to put you on the spot, but if someone wanted something kind of like spooky that might be, make them jump a little bit.
Make them jump. So that's one of the things with Safe Room is that we try to have conversations about horror games outside of scare factor, right? Because I think that with any genre, like people have certain notions about like what makes good horror. But, as we've, chatted about plenty of times, Devaughn and I in film, like there's a lot more than just being scared. But I would say in terms of now, like some good horror games, Stasis Bone Totem is a really great aquatic horror game. That's a point and click adventure game. So it has this retro style to it, but it has an incredible production value, and just anybody that's a fan of aquatic horror, that's going to scratch that itch. I would also recommend a game that just came out recently that's called Crow Country, which is a game that...
What is it?
It's Crow Country.
Crow? As in...
C-R-O. And then... Yep, Crow Country. And that is a traditional survival horror game, but it has some modern sensibilities to it. So it feels like an updating, basically. It's as if they had the wherewithal to make that game back in, 90s, early 2000s, that would absolutely be something that we'd play. And then the last thing that came out last year would be El Paso Elsewhere, which is more of a horror-centric version of Max Payne, which I think anybody that also is like a fan of noir storytelling will really get a kick out of that. Really fun, slow-mo bullet time against various monsters and whatnot. And then it has, again, that very noir, sort of like romantic sort of narrative with it. And really, again, fantastic production value. That's been the biggest thing over the last few years. These very small games that somehow feel like they're made by exponentially larger teams, and not to say not skilled teams, but just people that it's like they've been making games for 40 years or something, but clearly they're, indie developers that are much newer to the scene. So yeah, those would be some of my more recent recommendations.
Underline that last one. I'm going to give that because I loved the first couple of Max Payne games when they came out. So excellent. Thanks, Jay. We'll definitely have you back on again. I'll send you what we have coming up, and definitely feel free to hop on for some shows, man. We'd love to have you on again.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
Speaking of coming back on again, Devaughn, it is always a pleasure to have you on, especially for a movie that you hold so dear to you. But what is going on with the Spectre Cinema Club, my man?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for letting me get to nerd out about my all-time favorites for for a good amount of time. I appreciate that. But it is my birthday month over on Spectre Cinema. I mean, well, it's my birthday month everywhere, but on Spectre Cinema, we're doing movies from 1994. So at the time that this episode is out, you can hear us talk about Serial Mom, which me and Garrett went and saw in theaters on Mother's Day, and Matthew Lillard was there. And he introduced the movie and then did a Q&A afterwards. So that was super cool. So you can hear us talk about that. And we'll be talking Tammy and the T-Rex coming up as well, which I'm super stoked for. So you can hear us, new episodes every Tuesday at Spectre Cinema. And you can find me at all the usual places, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd @_DaddyDisco.
Will that be the extended version of Tammy and the T-Rex, like the R-rated version?
I'm gonna order the Vinegar Syndrome one. So whichever one that is.
Yeah, that would be the extended.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that's the only version I've seen. I don't think I've seen the censored one.
Got it. Excellent. Well, listeners, you know where to find us. Go visit podandthependulum.com to catch up on all of our back episodes. Closing in on 250 episodes now, like we're in our 6th year. So that's a lot of shows. And we have a lot of great stuff coming up this year, including some all-timer franchises. Make sure that you're following us on the socials, Pod and Pend over on Twitter, Pod and the Pendulum over on Instagram. And make sure that you are rating, reviewing, and subscribing to us everywhere that you get your podcast. That is the best way to help us grow our show. Like, leaves a 5-star review and a few kind words goes a long way to new listeners finding us and lets us know we are on the right page. You can also become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/pod and the pendulum for over 50 hours and growing of Patreon material. We have a kind of a neat project we're talking about behind the scenes we're going to unleash in June that won't necessarily be horror based, but will include some really fun movie discussions for a very specific movie year. And that is going to bring a close to our topic for Blade. We'll be back next week with Blade 2, and I think our first Del Toro. It'll be the first time we would ever really have a reason to cover him on the show, and really Del Toro before he was Del Toro.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's gonna be throwing a Mimic on the wheel anytime soon. That'd be
Probably
the only franchise that
somebody
we could do
will.
Del Toro in.
Somebody will, and they will be thrown off. But I hear my dog in the background sounding very sad for some reason, which probably means that everybody is behind a door and she can't get in and needs some love and attention. So we are out of here for today, and everyone have a great day. Thanks for listening, y'all.